Okay, welcome all. um, in advance of the Yom Tov Pesach, I just want to talk about a certain uniqueness that Hilchas Pesach seems to present in contrast to many other halachas. There's many different kontresim, svarim, rayas, lakan from different sifrei psak in regards to the idea of being machmer. Now, although Chumrah obviously stems from your Shemayim and it's a chashav zach to be machmer about things, Mitzad Sheni, you find oftentimes in the Poskim that there's no rush to be machmer in general, meaning as a general pasture, a person doesn't always need to be machmer, you need to follow the halacha. You find certain times in Rishonim that Mashal the Rosh says this, that someone who's machmer, in a case where he doesn't have to be machmer, is like as if he's a shtikl kfira, like you're being frummer than even what the Torah is mechayev of you. So, as a general pasture, a Pesik's job is to thread the needle between Chumrah and Kula and do what he believes that the Torah requires, what the Halach requires, without leaning too heavily on one side of the scale versus the other. Now, in contrast to that normal general pasture of Psak from the whole year, is the Psakim related in regards to Pesach. In regards to Pesach, it's seemingly overwhelmingly so that the Halach is to be Machmer. Starting in the Rishonim, you find all sorts of references to Yisrael Kadeshim Heim, that Klal Yisrael chooses to be machmer upon themselves in regards to Pesach in times that they don't even have to. In the later Achronim, you'll find Nashim Tzidkanius, as the mantle of adherence to Hilchas Pesach was passed on from to the women in the kitchen. So you'll find this phrase called Nashim Tzidkanius, that they're machmer on themselves more than they have to be. And it's always framed in a very positive lighting, that on Pesach, there's makom to be machmer more than the rest of the year. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the inyan of Chumrah on Pesach, and in particular, a Chumrah that I think that's Shavuot L'Chol Nefesh, if we could call it that, a Chumrah that's suitable for everybody. Now, Stam is as an interesting quip. This quip is attributed to many different rabbis. I think the earliest one it's attributed to is Baruch of Meshbrizh, who used to say that the Mishnah Psachim on Daf Nunvav, the Mishnah says, Eina Pesach Nechal, Ela Tzli, Eina Pesach Nechel Ela. When the Mishnah delineates all the different parameters of how a Korban Pesach has to be eaten, the Mishnah chooses to phrase it in a way by saying Ein HaPesach Nechel. The Pesach is not eaten only. So he says he's Ma'ir, and whoever this is attributed to is Ma'ir. That's a very interesting choice of words. Normally you would say, if you want to say the Pesach should be eaten a specific way, so the Mishnah would categorize it and say the Pesach has to be eaten Tzli, whole, you don't break bones, B'layla Achas. Let the Mishnah just say how Pesach should be eaten. Why does the Mishnah say Ein HaPesach Nechel, like double negatives, like the Pesach can't be eaten only? So says Baruch Meshbrizh, I think he's the earliest one is attributed to, that to tell you that on Pesach, it's Ein HaPesach Nechel. On Pesach, it's we don't eat. Pesach is a time of the pasture, the starting point is Ein Nechel, you don't eat. There's certain exceptions what you could eat. So, Stam, to keep that in mind, it's interesting. It's an anecdotal vart that very much frames how Pesach and Halacha is perceived. Now, to go into specific chumras in regards to Pesach would be endless. There's so many different things that Klal Yisrael is machmer on, or different segments of Klal Yisrael is machmer on, that to go into each one of them would be a total waste. Meaning, even starting from the idea of kitnius being usher, or gebraks being usher, that tremendous halakim of Klal Yisrael adopted for themselves, and of course the other sub-minhagim, certain kilos don't eat fish, certain don't eat garlic, certain don't eat mustard, certain don't eat eggs, certain peel all their vegetables, meaning some people prepare water before Pesach. There's an endless list of chumras from different kehilas that made it into the repertoire of Hilchas Pesach. So to go into any specific ones would be too exhaustive and time consuming. So I'm just going to stick to the overarching narrative of chumra in regards to Hilchas Pesach. Now, there's a few different mahalchim that are gebracht already in the Rishonim, and that's as follows. Rashi in Psachim, I think in Daf Chavtes. So Rashi, when he's being masber the Chumrah de Pesach, Rashi says that there's a svara. Rashi brings down a svara pshuta that since chametz is mutter kol hashana, what's asur on Pesach is something that's generally given is mutter the rest of the year. So there's a lot of gray area or ability for people to slip up and not realize that something's asur for them. So we're machmer about Pesach in an extra manner that we wouldn't generally be machmer to avoid, the slip-ups of something that's mutter the rest of the year. The Rambam, when he's masber the Chumrah Pesach, similarly employs a conventional halachic parameter. He says, "Heyois chametz bepesach zedav sheish lo matirim." exactly in which context it's Davar Sheish Matirim is not so clear. Not every type of chametz is mutter after Pesach, but chametz, by and large, as a whole, is Davar Sheish Matirim, and therefore Davar Sheish Matirim we're more machmer on, which is a similar svara to Rashi, that it's something that isn't really, isn't really usher the whole year, and therefore there's makam for gray area, and there's makam to be machmer. The Maisa, the Radvaz in the Tshuva, he brings, various different reasons that the Rishonim before him say. And the Radvaz in the Tshuva in Chelik Gimel, and Taf Kuf Ayin Zayin, the Radvaz machsavek all these various different tzadim, and he says something that has made it into vernacular, that became like something that everybody understands, is that chametz represents the Yetzer Hara. He says Chazal, whenever they refer to the Yetzer Hara, they refer to it as Sa'ar Shebe'isa, the yeast in the dough. So chametz refers to the Yetzer Hara, and therefore, when it comes to eradicating the Yetzer Hara from our lives, from our homes, we have to be machmer to eradicate the Yetzer Hara, even every tiny drop. And there's no shortcuts to eradicating the Yetzer Hara. Now that's like a dvar drush almost. I'm saying? It's not a purely halachic rationale, but the Radvaz employs this as the rationale for why we're machmer, what the great, where the great Chumrah de Pesach stems from. Now, interestingly, in regards to perceiving chametz as the Yetzer Hara, so the chida in Dvash Lefi brings b'shem Darizal, and I think the Shari Tshuva and Shulchan Aruch quotes this also, that someone who's nizer not to be oichel, even a mashu of chametz on Pesach, will not sin the rest of the year. So you see again that framing of chametz and Yetzer Hara and Aveira being framed, one as one and the same. We see them being framed like that as well. The Rav Emanuel Chayriki in his Mishnas Chasidim as well says that someone who's nizer from chametz is going to be nizer from Aveira. He says a similar concept. So you see that idea. Now the Chumrah Hadeshen has an interesting way of being maz with this that caught my eye. The Chumrah Hadeshen. Before the Chumrah Hadeshen, I just want to say one more thing. Before the Chumrah Hadeshen, there's a story that the Shendeshav Rav once met Reb Baruch of Garlitz, who was the son of the Tzanzer Rav. And the Shendeshav was on his way to Tzanz to try to procure the Divrei Chaim's Haskama to give a hechsher on sugar for Pesach. Sugar for Pesach was a big issue in Galicia and Yerushalayim and other places. A big shaila had to get kosher or sugar for Pesach, and he wanted to procure the Haskama of the Divrei Chaim to get the kosher Pesach sugar. So he met the Baruch of Garlitz, and when he was with him, he told him Baruch a story that he said he was once Chalamayid Pesach by a different Alter Rebbe, and he gave him like sugar-coated fruits, and he asked this other Rebbe, where's the sugar from? Where's the kosher sugar from? And this other Rebbe told him that the Iker Chametz on Pesach is Yetzer Hara, meaning don't stress about the sugar and the sugar and the Chametz on Pesach. Chametz is about the Yetzer Hara. So the Baruch of Garlitz took this story, he went back to his father, the Divrei and he told him over the stories, to which the Divrei said, Heintige Rebbes, he says, Shrekel Chazal, Heintige Rebbes, Chalila, he says, Isser Chametz Shekasav Atera is Mashu Chametz Kipshuta. The Divrei said, the Iker Chametz is Chametz. So it's not interesting that you can't take the Radvaz and the Mishnas Chasidim, this idea that Chametz represents Aveira, and that's where the Chumrah comes from, and turn it into a Kula, meaning Chametz Avada still is Chametz. The core Chumrah of Chametz is on a Mashu of Chametz. Now, these are all different svaras that exact, but the Chumrah Hadeshen has an interesting one, and there's a technical answer in the Chumrah Hadeshen, and there's an overarching theme in the Chumrah Hadeshen. The Leket Yosher in Chelik Aleph brings as follows. He says the Chumrah Hadeshen, V'amar Bala Chumrah Hadeshen, B'Seif Hadrasha. He says, why are we machmer on Hilchos Pesach more than Kol Shari Surim? He says, V'yesh Leimer, Kivin Shiri Inu, we saw HaKadosh Baruch Hu machmer, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu Alein is machmer on it. V'kasav b'y bal Yirah b'al Yimatzah. The Torah writes on Chametz the language of bal Yirah b'al Yimatzah, which is a much harsher, all-inclusive language than any other than all other Yisurim. Why not giving like HaKadosh Baruch Hu when oichel Chametz Matzah? Why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu care if we eat Chametz Matzah? Ela kemelech shetziva la'avadav lasis davar. It's like a king. He says, who was mitzavet to his servants to do something. V'kivin shereinu shahamelech machmer. And when the servants saw that the melech was very, very machmer about this thing, anu avadav nami machmerinu b'zeh mitzvah. His slaves, us, his servants, also decided to be extra machmer about this. So now the way the Chumrah Hadeshen is saying it, he's two components. First, he's saying, first of all, the pasuk says by Yirah b'al Yimatzah, which is a unique terminology that the Torah uses by Pesach. Maybe by Vedzara similar also, but by Pesach, and therefore you see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Torah, wanted us to be machmer by Pesach. And the second part of it, he says, is like a nedava. The fact that Klal Yisrael chooses to be machmer by Pesach is kiblu alatzmam, they realized that obviously this is something that's chaviv to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and if it's chaviv to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's chaviv to us, and Klal Yisrael, so to speak, was machmar on themselves to take on Chumrah the Pesach in a way, that's not even mandated of them according to the basic halachas. So it's like a kimu v'kiblu alatzmam, the Klal Yisrael is makabel to keep the Isurim of Chumrah Pesach in a more extreme and chumrah fashion than other Isurim and other mitzvahs in the Torah. Now, similarly to this, the Shut Min HaShemayim, which is a tshuva sefer for one of the Rishonim, which were shilas that were posed, via Chaloim, in Tshuva Ayin, in some versions Ayin Aleph, he says as follows: Va'od she'alti. He says, I asked, Al chametz b'Pesach im halacha get very oiser b'mashu. If the halacha is like the man Damur says, that it's oiser b'mashu. Ve'shivu, the answer I received min HaShemayim was mitzvahs chametz harei mitzvah rishonish and it's tava b'Yisrael. It's the first mitzvah that Klal Yisrael got. The kiblu aleim ba'ava. Klal Yisrael is mekabel it upon themselves. Ba'ava, b'chiba, b'reyes, v'chmiru, b'chlalius, u'prateo. And Klal Yisrael is machmer on themselves and all the klalim and the pratim of this mitzvah. Halei tirish, ha'machmer ba'hichmer ba'akasav, ba'yirah ba'yimatzim. Hashenkim b'shari surim shabbatera, chutz me'aved zara. So he mirrors what the Chumrah One does similarly and says both of these components again. He says, A, the Torah spoke about it in a certain more harsh, draconian terminology than all other Isurim. And Beis, since it was the first mitzvah, the first opportunity that Klal Yisrael had, they took it upon themselves to be machmer about this mitzvah more than anything else. Now, Yiach Shiyah, whatever the rationale is, we all know that the idea of Chumrah the Pesach and machmer and Pesach time is something that made its way very, very deeply to all different cries of Klal Yisrael. And for whatever reason it is, whether it's halachic based, whether it's something that Klal Yisrael chose to be moisav on themselves, it's something that made it very deeply into the bones of Klal Yisrael. Now, there is another inyan of Chumrah that I want to discuss that I think is relevant to bring up over here. The Mechaber in Siman Tav Chav Tes, right in the beginning of Hilchos Pesach, the Mechaber says as follows. The Mechaber says, Shoyelim b'Hilchos Pesach, Kedem lePesach Shleishim Yom. We start asking and being orangutan in the sugis of Hilchos Pesach 30 days before Pesach. Now, says the Mechaber, Haga, U'minig likna is chitim, l'chalkan la'aniyim. The minig is to buy chitim, to distribute them to the aniyim. The tzarech Pesach for tzarech HaPesach. Now the Ramah is referring to the halach of Moyes Chitim. Now this is something that the Sharitzian and many Achronim Shtalzachan, first of all, was Moyes Chitim have to do with Pesach? Meaning, why of all the Yom HaTovim that Klal Yisrael has, of all seasons, was Pesach the chosen time to raise money for the Aniyim? That's a question that needs to be discussed. But secondly, is what is the Ramah's Haysaf on the Mechaber? The Mechaber says we engage in learning Hilchas Pesach, Shleishim Yom Kedem LePesach. Comes along the Ramah. Ramah says we also give Moyes Chitim. Meaning, what do these two things have to do with each other? Ramah is written as glosses on the Mechaber. It should have to be something that corresponds to what the Mechaber is talking about. And I saw in the Rav Margalis and the Sefer Marganisa, the Rav Meir brings down, Rav Meir from Mishlana used to say that the Mechaber was writing a halacha sefer. The Ramah was a Rav, the Rav of Kraka. The Ramah approached it like a Rav approaches it. The Ramah says, yes, Shoylim v'darshim lamed yoyim kedem Pesach, because Pesach is complicated and there's a lot of chumras and there's a lot to know. But don't forget, we also have to be medactic to give the aniyah money. Meaning the Ramah wanted to elevate the idea of Moyes Chitim and the idea of providing for those who have less than us to the same level as the Shoylim v'darshim. Just like we're machmer, the Shoylim v'darshim, Shleishim Yom, we get started early to engage in all of Hilchas Pesach because it's complex and it's multi-layered and there's tons of chumras. So taking care of those who need and the aniyim in our midst is another chumrah that the Ramah wanted to attach, to the earliest time when Pesach preparation is starting. Now, to drive home this nakuda of the chumrah of Moyes Chitim kilu, meaning this being the chumrah that the Ramah is trying to have Klal Yisrael adapt in regards to Hilchas Pesach. I saw a story the Chassam Sofer used to say over about his Rebbe, Reb Mishulem Migra. Mishulem Migra was the Rav of Preshburg before the Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer used to say about Mishulem Migra that Mishulem Migra was very, very, very makbid about his matzahs. He had a small batch of matzahs that he would make himself, starting from the harvesting the wheat to the grinding to the baking, full of chumras, and it produced a tiny batch of matzahs that Mishulem Migra would keep separate that he would use by his seder. The matzahs they had for the rest of Pesach, for the rest of the family was secondary. These were Mishulem Migra's prized matzahs that he had, just a few for the Yom Tov of Pesach. And the Chassam Sofer says one year it happened that they had a servant girl in the home who was in charge of doing menial labor in the kitchen, and the Mishulem Migra's wife instructed the servant girl on Erev Pesach to go make some matzah meal. And the servant girl went to look for some matzah that she could use that would be suitable. And she found this small box of matzah stashed away on top of a corner of shelf somewhere. She figured this must be old matzah, last year's matzah. It was a little burnt up. It wasn't in good shape. She took it, she ground it up, and she made matzah meal out of it. Comes Leil HaSeder, and Rebbetzin Meshulam Migra is trying to set the table, and she realizes that her husband's matzahs that he poured his blood, sweat, and tears, all his chumras into, are gone. They're missing. And panic breaks out in the house. It's Bahala, till they find out that this servant girl is the one who used it for matzah meal. And the servant girl runs frightfully upstairs to the attic, and she locks herself in, and she starts crying. She's terrified. She can't believe what she did, and the whole family is avelus, waiting for Mishul Mikra to come home from shul. He comes home from shul that night, after Pesach, Pesach by night. He puts on his kittel. He's joyously getting ready to approach the Seder, and he sees his matzahs aren't there. He looks around the room, and he reads the room. He sees the temperature, the ilum's, in avelus, and he asks what happened. He has to pry it out of them. Turns out the servant girl, ground with the matzah into matzah meal, and his matzahs, his chumras that he waited for, that he looks forward all year to using for Pesach, were gone. So the Chum Sefer said over there, Meshulam Migra calmly asked, where could he find this servant girl who had done this? They said she's hiding in the attic. She's terrified. He goes up to the attic. He calls her out. He says, Tachter, my daughter, don't worry. It's fine. We're going to be fine over here. He asks her, did they buy you an extra dress before Yom Tif? Did they get you a pair of shoes? He inquires into, her life, what she's holding, and she says, yeah, they did get me. He says, after Pesach, we're going to get you more. You deserve more. You do such good work. And he calms her down. Then he comes downstairs and he instructs one of his sons. He says, go to the sheikhet and ask the sheikhet if he has some extra matzahs. So the son goes running, and Mishul Migra addresses his family. He says, kasher matzahs, I feel the sheikhet has. You think only Mishul Migra has kasher matzahs? Even the sheikhet has kasher matzahs, and it's perfectly fine. They get the matzahs from the sheikhet, and Mishul Migra fears a joyous seder like never before. And the Chum Sefer used to say over that he knows b'Meseira that on that night of Leil Seder, Mishul Migra was zeichet to Gili Eliyahu. Because the night that he prioritized the chumrah of caring for the people around him, the people who need help, instead of the chumrah of his matzahs, was the night that he elevated chumrah to the level that he could be zeichet to Gili Eliyahu. So I think this story just drives home the Ramah's agenda in the beginning of Simon Tav Chav Tes, where the Ramah seeks to point out that although we're handling chumras and we're saying Shleishim Yom Kaidem LePesach, a person should start learning because there's so many halachas to know, it's also important to remember the chumrah of caring for the people who have less, who need more, and that's how one's zeichet to Gili Eliyahu.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.